You learned love like a transaction, not all at once, not in a single moment, but slowly, quietly, through patterns, through the way affection arrived after achievement, through the silence that followed mistakes, through the subtle shift in tone when you disappointed them. And so, without anyone ever explicitly saying it, you understood the rule. You are loved when you are good. And something inside you adjusted. You became careful, observant, strategic. You learned how to read the room before you entered it. You learned how to shrink parts of yourself that felt risky and amplify the parts that earned approval. You didn't call it survival. You called it being a good child. But here is the paradox. The quiet, devastating truth at the center of your life. The very thing that helped you receive love is now the thing preventing you from ever feeling it fully. Because when love is conditional, authenticity becomes dangerous. And when authenticity becomes dangerous, you stop being yourself. Even now, as an adult, you may not notice it immediately. It doesn't always look like pain. It looks like overthinking your words before speaking. It looks like anxiety after sending a message. It looks like constantly asking yourself, was that okay? Did I do something wrong? Are they still okay with me? It looks like being loved, but never quite believing it. Because deep down, there is still a child inside you, waiting for the moment when the love disappears, waiting for the condition to be broken, waiting for the withdrawal. And so you stay ahead of it. You perform, you adjust, you become what is needed, but never fully what is true. To understand this wound, we need to name it. This is not just strict parenting. This is not just high expectations. This is conditional attachment. And within psychology, it closely relates to something called anxious preoccupied attachment. This form of attachment develops when a child experiences love as inconsistent, earned, or dependent on behavior. The nervous system learns something critical. Connection is not safe unless I maintain it. So the child becomes hyper-aware. This leads to hypervigilance, a state where the brain is constantly scanning for emotional threats. Not physical danger, but relational danger. Tone changes, facial expressions, subtle distance. The brain becomes like a radar system, constantly asking, am I still loved? And because this question is never fully answered, it becomes a permanent loop. Neurologically, this reshapes the brain's threat detection system, particularly the amygdala, making it more reactive to perceived rejection. At the same time, the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for self-referential thinking, becomes overactive, meaning you don't just experience life, you constantly evaluate yourself within it. How am I being perceived? Did I do enough? Was I too much? But perhaps the most important concept here is self-worth conditionality. This is when a child internalizes the belief, I am only valuable when I meet certain standards. It's like growing up inside a house where love is a light switch, and your behavior is the only thing controlling it. So you learn to keep the light on at all costs, even if it means living in the dark within yourself.
What does it cost to earn love? Everything. It costs spontaneity. It costs honesty. It costs the freedom to fail. But more than anything, it costs your relationship with yourself. Because when you are constantly adapting to be loved, you stop asking a very important question. What do I actually feel? And instead, you ask, what should I feel to be accepted? This creates a quiet, invisible grief. A grief not of loss, but of absence. The absence of being known. The absence of being loved without effort. The absence of ever being able to rest in someone's presence without performing. This creates a deep internal split. One part of you is real, messy, emotional, imperfect. The other part of you is curated, controlled, acceptable. And over time, the curated version becomes your identity. Not because it's true, but because it's safe. And the real version? It waits, quietly, underneath layers of adaptation, hoping someday it will be allowed to exist. But here is the tragedy. When love is conditional, vulnerability feels like risk. And when vulnerability feels like risk, intimacy becomes exhausting because intimacy requires being seen, and being seen feels dangerous. This is where the past becomes the present, because what began as a survival strategy in childhood becomes a pattern in adulthood. And you might recognize yourself here. You might feel responsible for other people's emotions, constantly adjusting your behavior to keep others comfortable. You might struggle with boundaries, not because you don't understand them, but because saying no feels like risking connection. You might overachieve, not from passion, but from a quiet fear that without success, you are not enough. You might feel anxious in relationships, even when nothing is wrong, because your nervous system is waiting for something to go wrong. You might apologize excessively, even for things that aren't your fault, because you learned that maintaining harmony was your responsibility. You might struggle to receive love, deflecting compliments, doubting sincerity, or feeling uncomfortable when someone genuinely cares for you. And perhaps most painfully, you might not know who you are outside of what others need you to be. But here is the truth that changes everything. These are not personality traits. They are adaptations. They are intelligent, necessary strategies that once protected you. But now, they are outdated. And healing begins with a single radical shift: witnessing instead of performing, not fixing yourself, not judging yourself, but observing. This is the part of me that learned love had conditions. Because for years, you may have unknowingly gaslit your own pain. You told yourself, others had it worse. My parents loved me. I'm just overthinking. But love can exist and still be conditional. And that condition can still leave a wound. Acknowledging that wound is not betrayal, it is truth. Healing from conditional love is not about blaming the past. It is about changing your relationship with yourself in the present. And that begins with something called inner child reparenting. This means learning to give yourself what you were only given conditionally: acceptance without performance, compassion without achievement, presence without judgment. It means sitting with yourself, not when you are perfect, but especially when you are not. It also involves shadow work, the process of reconnecting with the parts of yourself you had to hide, the too emotional part, the too sensitive part, the not good enough part, because those parts were never the problem. They were just unwelcome. Healing asks you to welcome them back. And perhaps most importantly, healing asks you to choose softness, not as a weakness, but as resistance. Because your entire life, you were taught to tighten, adjust, and perform. Softness is the opposite of that. Softness is saying, I don't need to earn this moment. I don't need to prove my worth right now. I am allowed to exist as I am. There is a quiet, powerful shift that happens when you begin to internalize this. You stop chasing love and start allowing it. Not because you finally become enough, but because you realize you always were. A philosopher once suggested that the deepest human desire is not to be loved for what we do, but for what we are. And maybe that's what this entire journey is about. Not becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before love became something you had to earn. So if you recognize yourself in this, if something inside you feels seen or even slightly uncomfortable, that's not weakness, that's awareness. And awareness is the beginning of freedom. Because the goal is not to fix yourself. You were never broken. The goal is to become whole, to reclaim the parts of you that were traded for approval, to build a life where love is not a reward, but a foundation, and slowly, gently, to teach yourself the one thing you should have learned from the beginning. You are allowed to be loved without conditions. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who might still be living inside this pattern. And if you're on this journey of understanding yourself more deeply, stay. Because this is not just content. This is a process of remembering who you truly are.